talk about another fucking call I made, okay, which is a possible rail strike. Ladies and gentlemen, remember when the Biden administration was like running around taking a victory lap saying that they had actually completed the rail strike when it was just simply an extension? Well, it's back. It's back on the map. It's back on the market. We're going to talk about that before we get to the psychotic right-wingers and the way that they are deflecting away while simultaneously saying it's basically good that the LGBT attack happened. Okay.
As the holiday season begins, there are new concerns about a possible rail strike after one of the nation's largest railroad unions rejected a deal that had been reached back in September. An agreement was negotiated with the help of the Biden administration, but that agreement seems to have fallen apart for now. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House for us. Ed, good morning.
Tony, good morning. They are monitoring this quite closely here at the White House, saying a shutdown is unacceptable, and they're encouraging all sides to continue talking ahead of a December 5th deadline. 12 rail unions across the country were asked to ratify a deal that was reached back in September, but 4 of the unions have voted to reject the deal. Workers would get a raise under the proposal, but the amount of sick leave continues to be a major sticking point, especially how they could use their sick leave. If they can all come to an agreement by December 5th, the first of the unions would walk off the job, and the others are likely to follow in solidarity. And that would cause a major ripple effect across the economy just a few weeks before Christmas. One industry group estimates
they were like, come on, 20% increase, Jack. Shut the fuck up about everything else. Why?
$2 billion a day, causing significant supply chain issues and delays of food, fuel, water, coal, and other issues that would send prices soaring. Now, Congress could step in to stop a rail strike and likely would do so. They've done so, in fact, 18 other times in the past. Here at the White House, they say the president continues to be briefed on the situation. There are no plans as of now for any administration officials here at the White House or over at the Labor Department to get involved. But with just under 2 weeks to go, Nate, we'll see if that holds.
Ed, thank you.
There it is. A rail strike during peak is exactly what the unions want. This gives them all the power. I think Marty Walsh did this intentionally. I mean, so originally, what they did, I think, what the Biden administration basically did was like get a fucking quick media dub, before, so that this didn't like impact them before the midterms. Okay. And now they have to unironically deal with this. Because if you remember, like, the reason why they did this, which they're going to say in their own words right now, but the reason why the railway was doing this is because their hours were fucking insane. Like, they have no time off. They can't, if they get sick, they can't even, stay home. They're on call 24/7. They don't get holidays. They don't get anything, right? They have no rights. They have horrific workplace conditions in comparison to other jobs. In comparison to what they're supposed to have. I heard that the reports, I had heard reports that they came to an agreement where there was back pay and wage increases. I told you guys back then, I don't know if there's a clip of it that you can just pull up from the top of your mind right here. Okay. But I told you even back then that this was not done. Okay. I told you again that this was not done. They were just pushing it to the future. They were passing the buck down to a post-midterm election cycle news coverage. When you work on a rail line, you're on 24/7, like you don't have the option of taking time off. If they call you in, you have no choice but to go in. Yes, exactly. They traded their position of power for the media win for the elections, and now that loan is due. Yep. Okay.
No on the contract because we deserve more.
It does not meet the requirements for quality of life that we need. We need time to sleep. We need time to rest. We need time to enjoy our lives. We don't have any of that now.
We're considered essential employees, and we don't have a single paid sick day to use when we're off. We've worked through the pandemic. We were considered essential, and now it seems like we're expendable.
If a person is sick, they shouldn't have to use all of their paid days that they had to earn the previous year before to take a day off.
We're constantly coming to work sick and exhausted.
We routinely work 14 hours and longer
every day.
We have currently lost 2 BMW members in the past few weeks, and they might have been here today with us if they would have just been able to, rest and reset.
We've seen major cuts to our workforce, and we're feeling it every day. The least that the railroads can do is give us paid sick leave so we don't drag illnesses to work.
I voted no because rail workers devote months of their lives away from their families.
There's no dignity in missing your kid's birthday. There's no dignity in missing all the holidays. There's no dignity when you have no pictures to look back when your family went on trips and you weren't there to take pictures with them.
We work to live, not live to work.
People just...
I sympathize with them and I'm on their side, but this sounds like every nurse and doctor in America. Yeah, brother, what the fuck do you mean? Yeah, they are also workers. Nurses and doctors, also workers. Railroad workers, also workers. Notice how they have the exact same fucking problems. Notice how they have the exact same demands. Because every worker deserves dignity and quality of life improvements. That's the point. Yes. But weirdly enough, you literally, instead of noticing, using that as an opportunity to recognize class solidarity, you immediately approach it from an antagonistic position, which is, again, a capitalist wet dream. Your bosses want you to feel like this. Your bosses want to pit you against others, okay? And the media will always use this as an opportunity to say, look at these look at these guys. I mean, what more do they want? They got 25% pay raise. Like, that's crazy. Yeah, it's solidarity. The entire purpose of this is that, like, you notice what's going on here. You recognize that you have similar issues at home. You have similar issues in your fucking workplace, and you support them. And they, in return, also recognize when you have a problem in a similar capacity and support you. That's what solidarity is.
Just want to be able to see their kids, maybe make a few more memories, I don't have a whole lot of these. My kid's grown. We got a lot of young pups out here that are just starting to see their kids grow a little bit. Let's show some humanity.
Asking for a contract that addresses sick days and family time off doesn't seem like an extreme request.
The rail industry made a record $20 billion in profits in 2021. It spent $18 billion to buy back its own stock that same year, investing in its wealthy shareholders instead of its workers.
The railroads have had record profits throughout my career. Only less than 2% of the buybacks over the last year would pay for the sick days that we ask for.
It's also worth mentioning that a lot of the positions working on a rail line is backbreaking labor as well. Just like the oil rig workers or construction workers, they usually are broken down before even reaching middle age, and they get little to no benefits or assistance from their employers. Yep, absolutely.
We're asking for our senators to step in and help us improve this contract, not impose it.
Our public servants can help us out by giving us those paid sick days.
We need our senators to side with workers because adequate staffing and quality of life is a step toward protecting our supply chain and ensuring a healthy freight rail system.
Stay out of it or support us.
If you guys do start writing up stuff, give me a call. I can give you some ideas.
This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. This is a complete country issue.
Do right by the people you represent and not the big businesses.
There it is.
This is about doing the right thing for working people.
In-depth explanation of the railroad
Inflations,
infrastructure.
supply chains, climate change?
Yeah. For
Three
those
things that are made worse by four big companies.
So, for the record, for those of you who don't understand, like, people are like, oh, well, we don't even have railroads in this country or whatever. Like, a lot of our system still absolutely relies, a lot of our infrastructure still absolutely relies on, like, gains made in infrastructure spending hundreds of fucking years ago, basically. And yes, a lot of our commerce travels through fucking railroads, okay, through trains. And, when there's a massive strike, you will recognize that, a big part of your lives rely on that. It's not just passenger rail. Exactly. Here,
companies in the US. These 4 companies that I'm about to talk about fly under the radar of pretty much every American, but they actively shape and make our logistics systems infinitely worse than they could be. They are slow to adopt new technologies, and they are always fighting any change to their industry. They uphold their terrible status quos and do not care about reducing their carbon footprints at all. Today we're going to be talking about the Class 1 railroads of the United States. Alright, so for us to understand why the freight railroads actually suck.
For the record, Alan is a socialist a train boy. He's a big train fan. He's a big fan of railroads and trains in general. He made that really awesome video. Remember, absolutely eviscerating what was it, like Wendigoon Productions or whatever? Like, who did he destroy? That literally fucking caused them to take down the video, I believe. He's autistic? I don't know. Okay, he's autism coded, okay? Just because he likes trains, I don't know if he's autistic or not. I mean, he could be. Real life lore, yeah. Yeah, he eviscerated Real Life Lore's high-speed rail. Okay, yeah, you can steal the Mr. Beast case, yeah. No, take it. It's all Mr. Beast merchandise. Yeah, no, take it. And tavuğu yaptıracak mısın? Yapacak mısın? Gelmiş olması lazım. No, what's going on? My wallet's over there. You just grab it. I gotta do this. Come on. Just grab my wallet. It's over there. Ay. Jesus Christ. Okay. Arlo took it on the chin like a proper lad. Don't have to shit on him. That's true. Our Real Life Lord did actually man up and you know, said that his video missed the mark by a lot.
And how they affect you in the United States, we first have to go over some history of how these companies came to be. And yes, despite what you've heard, our freight rail system is actually not as good as you think it is, but we'll get to that. So we have to start at the beginning, of course. Back in the 1830s and the 1840s, railroads started appearing in the United States. Being a new technology at the time, they competed with the gold standard of transportation, which was the canal and waterway system. To get the railroads going, many states and later the US government granted not only large loans, but huge land grants were also given. These land grants not only made room for the railroad right-of-ways, but also granted large swaths of land around the tracks too. This gave incentive for the railroads to build outward rapidly, commonly selling off portions of land to settlers and new businesses along the way. This was also basically a way for the US government to kind of get companies to do the dirty work by forcing Native Americans off of part of their lands too, so that should not be understated. But later in this video, when talking about modern railroads, let us not forget that these lines would have not existed if it wasn't for the US government, immigrant laborers, and a ton of loans from each of the individual states, but we'll circle back to that later. Moving on a bit in history, all of the railroads mostly did incredibly well all the way up until the 1950s and 60s. By this point, there was an obvious rift in how the way that certain railroads were operating, and that rift was a literal geographical feature too. You see, the US transportation network was split right down the Mississippi River. The railroads to the west of the Mississippi were doing incredibly well into the late 1960s and early 1970s. For example, the Burlington Northern built new coal hauling routes in the early 1970s, and that made it into a golden goose worth billions of dollars. This is in stark contrast to the railroads that were operating to the east of the Mississippi, with the most ominous being the failed merger of the Pennsylvania and the New York Central Railroads. Both railroads were the largest networks in the Northeast, and when they tried to merge with each other into Penn Central, they created the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. Well, up to that point. It was so much of a failure that the government stepped in and created its own railroad called Conrail. A few years after Conrail's creation, the government also passed the Staggers Act, which was the first endeavor to help deregulate the industry to promote growth. The Western railroads continued to be successful, and despite many routes having to be abandoned or mothballed, the East Coast operations were saved by Conrail. But there was one consistent thing that was happening the entire time. Railroad after railroad was disappearing, slowly being bought out by its competitor, and this largely mirrors what in modern day how social media sites buy each other out. In the following decades, railroads like the Burlington Northern would buy out one of their competitors and acquire all of their tracks. The Burlington Northern bought the Santa Fe, so it naturally turned into the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, or BNSF, or the Big Orange Railroad as most people see it nowadays. Anyway, with all of these mergers, we eventually have our system cut down to only 4 large Class 1 railroads. Yes, I know there are some others, but they kinda don't count. These 4 railroads own the entire rail system in the United States. There are some exceptions, but we'll get to those later. And all of these railroads don't even compete against each other. BNSF and Union Pacific control all of the tracks west of the Mississippi, and CSX and Norfolk Southern control all of the tracks to the east. This effectively leaves the U.S. with 2 duopolies that control the entire rail logistics system. And even worse, most cities in the U.S. only have 1 railroad operating to and from that city. For example, if you had a business that needed to ship a product via rail and your business was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the only railroad to ship things in and out of the city is BNSF. So even if there is a duopoly between BNSF and Union Pacific on long-distance shipping in the West, the majority of the local customers that use the railroads only have the choice of using the one railroad. In the past 50 years, this has forced many businesses to ship products via truck instead of rail, even if the shipping with rail is more efficient. I have a whole video on that here. But local shipping gets a whole lot worse when you factor in what these railroads do with their infrastructure. So, if you ever watch late night news or a television channel that only elderly people might be watching, you might run into a commercial like this, where it's some predatory company trying to get you to do a reverse mortgage on your home for them, basically allowing you to sell back the home to a bank or an investor slowly, almost as if you're taking it all out that you originally put in to buy the house and pay off the loan in the first place. Well, imagine that scenario, but it's the freight railroads doing this to their infrastructure. You see, being the wonderfully optimized capitalists that they are, they rarely ever spend money to actually upgrade and maintain their infrastructure like bridges, tracks, tunnels, and switches. They often will downgrade infrastructure to have less of it, but only later to bitch and complain that there's too much demand when it's their own fucking fault that they can't ship their own goods. There are really only 2 situations where they will actually upgrade or improve things. One is if there is an insane demand and they have a bottleneck for like a decade. This is what BNSF did with their main line. Or if you have a bridge that completely fails and they have to replace it. But if there's one thing to blame for the lack of care for infrastructure and slower operations, it is the implement of a practice called precision scheduled railroading. And like the title suggested earlier, it is neither precise nor scheduled and is barely railroading. PSR basically makes trains double the length and attempts to reduce crew numbers, but there's a huge catch. You see, in the past, you would normally ship 200 cars, like 100 to one place and 100 back the other direction. You'd normally need 4 trains. And because they were shorter trains, they could easily use the passing sidings to get around each other. And you could accomplish this in 2 shifts on one line, meaning they'd have to pay 4 crews to get this all done. But when PSR came into practice, suddenly you had trains that were too long to fit on passing sidings, meaning that some of the passing sidings were too short for the new double-length trains. Normally, for any logistics operation, this would be a huge problem, because suddenly the line would be operating 50% slower, but This is not a logistics problem in the eyes of railroad CEOs and bean counters. You see, even if the trains are 50% slower, the railroad only has to pay for 3 shifts of workers instead of 4. And also, because the trains can't fit past each other now, one of the 3 shifts usually gets to sit with a train for multiple hours waiting for an open line, not moving until they clock out and have to get driven back to the yard or to a hotel. All of this just increases issues with the supply chain, exaggerating problems that already exist by making goods and freight go even slower from point A to B. This is extremely obvious at the end of the pandemic when items were on backlog and certain goods were out of stock and with manufacturers for months. Also, if you're on Amtrak and wonder why the freight trains keep getting in the way and delaying your train, this is why. It doesn't matter if Amtrak has the priority, the freight train can't physically get out of the way because it can't fit on the sidings anymore. Before we move on, I want to briefly mention that all 4 Class 1 railroads.
Another instance where capitalism, instead of maximizing on efficiency, is just creating opportunities for companies to drive more profits rather than create new solutions. And also, of course, let's not forget that the entirety of the system is on government-funded infrastructure, okay? Public funds that went to infrastructure that now we all rely on at this stage. It could be done better, and there are plenty of examples in Europe that are adequate.
Railroads have refused to electrify their lines and trains, mainly because every one of them hates capital spending. And dear God, if they have to plan more than a fiscal quarter at a time. When
nationalizing this seems like a no-brainer. It's it's not even a no-brainer. It's what needs to be done. But they won't do it.
Networks like the Indian Railways are fully electrifying. The US continues to use beat-up diesels, and they're not even ordering new diesel locomotives. The last large order was in 2008. They've been rebuilding them since. It's only a matter of time before a state or fuel prices forces them to start electrifying. And no, hydrogen and battery locomotives are a scam. They are not going to work, or at least by themselves they won't. I was recently on a podcast that discussed this topic, and you can listen to that here. Anyway, let's go onwards.
That's not there, brother.
So, if there's one thing that every corporation loves doing, it's boasting about record profits and then immediately saying to employees that, oh, we can't pay them anymore. And railroads are no stranger to this concept. And then how workers are treated at the largest railroads in the country is a complete shame. Every rail worker is required to work roughly 5 days a week, but if you haven't worked for
it was like top right of the screen. Okay, my
10
bad.
or more years at the railroad, you get absolutely shafted with hours. Basically, you're working 5 days a week, but during those 5 days, you have no idea what your hours are going to be until 4 hours before your shift, you get a message or call phoning you in for your shift. This can be at 10 a.m., 5 p.m., 2 a.m., doesn't matter. You have to show up for your shift after you get that call 4 hours before. You can imagine that this can wreak absolute havoc on your social life. You basically just have to give up on that during the week when you're on call. And recently, between furloughs and railroads constantly being understaffed because of mismanagement during the pandemic, workers have had enough. You might have heard about it, but in the middle of September, all of the rail workers' unions were authorizing a strike. The strike was mainly asking for better working conditions, more paid days off, and better medical leave. You know, basic fucking benefits. For now, the strike has been averted as the federal government pushed for the companies to agree to some of the union terms, but I have a feeling that we're going to see this again. We aren't at the end of it, because the workers didn't nearly get enough. Either way, it's terrible that these companies can fuck up the environment, purposely run shittier services, and treat their workers terribly.
I live in the UK and we have a similar infrastructure issues here. Sadly, we rely more on rail travel and it's deteriorating by the day. Ticket prices increasing, profits increasing, but zero investment in staffing or passenger comfort. It's like riding on a cattle truck. Yes, you do understand that it's also a consequence of privatization. That's what it is in the UK as well. Literally privatization. That's what is the issue. You know, Europe is just like following on the footsteps of capitalist daddy United States of
without
America.
any threat from the government. But that's not entirely true, because there are some solutions to fix our broken freight system.
I wonder what he will say.
So, as I said in the beginning, the US does not currently have the best freight rail system in the world. Hell, not even in North America. Canada actually does it slightly better, but they've got a bunch of different problems. If you want an example of a truly fantastic rail system, Switzerland is easily the best in the world at the moment, but that's a topic for another video entirely. Plus, you bozos in the comment will be like, but Switzerland is so small compared to the United States. Look, there was really only one country in history that ever matched the size of the US geographically. And it absolutely whooped our asses in railroad management.
Oh, damn. I thought he was going to talk about I thought he was going to say China.
But again, let's talk about local policies that we could enact to fix this shit.
I literally thought he was going to say China, which, by the way, also whooping our asses.
Tax incentives. If the railroads are motivated by money, then let's make the money walk the walk. Let's change property tax policies to push railroads to double track again and also electrify. Then let's legally bind them to run services fast and not skimp on crews just to save a fraction of the dollar. But if you really want to shape them up in their acts, you would scare them with the N-word. No, not that N-word. We're talking about nationalization. Because the government could buy out all of the property and infrastructure from the freight companies, but the freight companies can still access their routes on contract leases. I actually have a whole video on this concept, and I have a second video on nationalization coming very soon.
Okay, this one he didn't actually
Video
promote
on this
it.
concept.
There is nothing here, okay? Shut the fuck up,
And I have
chatters.
a second video on nationalization coming very soon that's in the works, so stay subscribed if you want to see that. Either way, there are a lot of ways to tackle this issue that is the railroads in the United States. But we're just getting started. Half the battle is just informing the average person on how bad it actually is, because we've been gaslit into thinking otherwise. Like I said, there will be more videos on these topics in the future, and thanks for watching. I hope that you'll stick around.
This was, of course, from Alan Fisher, who is very good at this sort of stuff. Okay. You have such media brain. The main thing you focus on is calls to action without actual links. Okay, man, shut up. He's great. Alan blew up since we last watched. Yeah, he only has 170K subs. What do you mean? Last time I watched Alan on this broadcast, he had 20K subs, I think. And he deserves it. He's great. Here's another railway strike that's slated to happen. RMT boss Mick Lynch in the UK. Notice how we go across the pond and the workers there have the exact same problems. Maybe not the exact same ones, but like the structural issues are still the same. Capital owning bosses trying to work the railroad workers to the goddamn bone.
So over 40,000 members across Network Rail and the 14 train operating companies will take a series of 48-hour strikes on the 13th and 14th and 16th and 17th of December, and then again on January the 3rd and 4th and the 6th and 7th. There will also be an overtime ban across the railways of all of our members from the 18th of December until the 2nd of January, meaning that we'll be taking continuous industrial action for more than 4 weeks. Despite every effort made by our negotiators, it is clear now that the government is directly interfering in our attempts to reach a settlement. The union suspended previous strike action in good faith to allow for intensive negotiations to resolve the dispute. Yet Network Rail has failed to make an improved offer on jobs, pay and conditions for our members during the last 2 weeks of talks. I'm not the Grinch, I'm a trade union official and I'm determined to get a deal.
Yeah, they're calling him the Grinch in UK media now. Like they're saying he's like shitting on Christmas. Oh, Rishi, I thought you loved the worker.